with the people who came to that schoolhouse opening, there might be, 40 people who are coming to Quilt Market for the first time. So something
Loyalty.
based like any other industry is
Yeah.
replenishing your customer base.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And Quilt Festival was the same way. The sort of as you talk to people, like this is where they save their vacation days, or this is like their thing, right? That then that's the festival is the public side of it, but super loyal people and super happy people. That was sort of amazing to see. I mean, I was there the whole time, right? And, you didn't see people screaming or upset or anything. It was just joy. And that really says a lot about what you guys do and how you put it on because there's a lot going on. It's
Yeah, I
kind of
mean, we
remarkable.
realize, I mean, and we are grateful that people, as you mentioned, do take their vacation time and fly and hotel. And I mean, there's a lot of expenses and time and money before you even walk through our doors. So we realize that. So as a company, we want to make, our show as great an experience for the attendee as possible from, the way it looks. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but we spend thousands and thousands of dollars just on flowers to put, throughout the hallway. It doesn't necessarily help us, but it makes things look nicer.
Yeah.
So, we definitely try and do that.
So yeah, it's beautiful and all the signs and like you just feel like you really do take over that building in a really amazing way. And it's a great
Well,
building.
yeah, and one thing I want to mention about the building is one of the advantages that we have here in Houston that we don't necessarily have on the road is, we're in the same building. We work with the same staff every year. We know the layout of the building. We know where the signs need to go. So there's a lot to be said about just consistency in how we present the show because we're in that same location for the fall market and the fall festival each year. Doesn't always go so smoothly when we do some of the road shows, but that's one of the
Interesting.
advantages that we really have in Houston is,
Really interesting.
they know us as people, they know our show.
Yeah.
So we can call somebody from the convention center and say, I need this sign by this room or
Right.
whatever, and they know immediately what we're talking about.
Now, is it true that you're the largest event going into the convention center each year? That's what I kept hearing over and over again.
Into the George R. Brown, we're the
Yeah.
largest. There is a larger public show that draws more attendees over at Energy Park. It's called the Nutcracker Market. It's like a big Christmas,
Interesting.
you know, uh,
Right.
Christmas goods and holiday
Uh-huh.
goods and things like that. So they draw more attendees overall. So we're typically the number 2 attended public show in the city of
Mhm.
Houston, but we're definitely the largest show at the George R. Brown.
And I imagine for the everybody's staying and there's a lot of travel and all of that you're sort of a more national or an international event than I would say that. I imagine the Christmas show is not as well, maybe not. Maybe it's a national, international show.
Yeah, no, we
Yeah.
for festival, and these are just people we keep track of. So if you just buy a ticket and come to our show, we don't necessarily have a way of knowing who you are or where you're from. But if you
Right.
register for classes or buy your tickets online, then we can get a sort of demographic information. So just from the people who take our classes, they typically come from between 35 and 40 different countries every year.
That's amazing.
Japan, Brazil, Australia. I mean, they come from all over for that. So yeah, I would imagine we have way more of an international contingent than the Nutcracker market does.
Right. Interesting. So tell me more about sort of organizing the show. This is a huge thing now. You do it every year, so that helps.
Yeah.
But, the classes and the, Quiltapalooza and the name that you've really sort of thought through, and I imagine that grew over time. But sort of what is the process? Now you're done, like you finished this year. Like, are you all starting on next year, or sort of how does the planning go for this? It seems
Yeah,
like a lot of.
we say literally, it's funny sometimes, people come to the big shows in Houston and then say to the staff, well, what do you do the rest of the year? So, in addition to putting on 2 other shows in the spring, I mean, we start planning for next year's Houston shows pretty much at the previous year's show.
Amazing.
I'll use this fall as an example. We were already talking to and recruiting teachers for next year at the last year's show. Now, you're right. There is a certain familiarity to it to where, we know what the room at Quiltapalooza is going to look like. We know what some of the things are going to be, but every year there's changes both into our program because we want to keep things fresh. We don't want to be just the same old, same old. And then also there's differences with the convention center itself. You didn't see the past 3 years. I mean, that convention center has almost been a construction war zone but everything was nice and neat and finished this year. So even when we do the show the same, we might be faced with something like, well, these 3 entrances will be unusable, or this parking lot is no longer valid. So, and some of that can happen up to the week of the show. So we just try and plan, as much and as carefully as possible. We only have about 13, 15 full-time people here at this company, but we do bring in an army of people to help actually run the show.
Amazing. So a little bit on the economics of it. So you've got the teachers coming in. How does that work exactly in terms of, do you invite teachers? Do they apply? And then do you pay teachers, or do they get a percentage of sort of how does the economics of the show, if you're willing to talk a little bit about that, how does that work exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So the teachers, it's a process. We do invite some teachers, but then we do also open the application process. So we get all these, applications from teachers who want to teach a certain class. And then our education department, there's, 3 or 4 people involved with deciding which teachers we actually invite to come do the show. We do have a certain turnover. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly correct on this, but I think you can teach for us 2 or 3 years in a row, and then you take a year or 2 off. So we just don't have the same teachers teaching the same things all the time. And then the teachers are paid, percentage with the percentage of the people who apply for the classes with some sort of guaranteed flat rate.
Oh, that's great.
They're paid, a percentage more of, obviously, a teacher who sells out her class is going to get a larger amount than a teacher who has a few attendees, but there is a certain amount that they're at least guaranteed.
And then these classrooms are equipped with sewing machines from various companies. And how does that work exactly? Do you have ongoing relationships that that Janome is going to be doing 2 rooms, or sort of how does that?
Absolutely. One of the most wonderful things about the show, I think, for the class attendee is, you still have to buy certain supplies for the show. Your fabric, you have to bring your rotary cutters, sometimes things like that. But as far as the sewing machines and some of the larger things, those are all provided for you. So you don't have to, lug your sewing machine from Nebraska or something like that. And that's because we do have relationships with the sewing machine companies that, typically will take a certain amount of rooms and provide a machine for usually 1 per student. Per room, which is, again, a wonderful thing.
Amazing.
And then sometimes what the companies will do is they will take the machines that have been used in the classes and then sell them, if the students at usually a lower rate directly to the students if they want to purchase them, because obviously they can't be then resold as new machines. But we have wonderful relationships with all the sewing machine companies, and of course, on their end, it's also a good good exposure for them.
Right.
If somebody is only used the Janome and they're taking a classroom with a Bernina, they might go, oh, well, I like this about the Bernina. So it's really a win-win situation for both of us. But yeah, we could not do that without the generosity of our partnering companies.
That's really interesting. So if someone's trying to understand sort of your company and what your company does, you really are sort of facilitating these relationships that are only possible because they're in these spaces. So the relationship between the student and the potential company, the sewing machine company, or the reps, or other things. Is there other sort of aspects of the company that, like, the public or the business to business doesn't necessarily understand, that would be helpful for them to understand about sort of your company and sort of where you sit within the industry? Like, do you make lots? I mean, is it like, why do you do it, I guess? And like, is it because, is there a profit to be made from it? Is it because you really believe in the quilting industry? Is it both? Are you always trying to make sure you just make enough to keep going? Like, sort of, what is the company exactly, and where does it sit in the industry?
Well, I think it's definitely a combination of both of those. I mean, the people in this company, the people who started this company, the people who work for this company are passionate about quilts and quilting and things like that. On the other hand, it is also a business. I mean, we're not a nonprofit company, even though we're affiliated with nonprofits like IQA, like the Texas Quilt
Mm-hmm.
Museum. Quilts Incorporated is a business. It's a for-profit company. So, we have to, always walk that balance between making things affordable, but then also being able to turn, some sort of a profit as well. I had one other point that I just lost. Maybe it'll come back to me. I don't know.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting about it. And and the company itself that you, so tell me a little bit about the road shows. I'm hoping maybe you'll let me come to a road show sometime because I think it'd be really
You're,
interesting to
no, you're
see.
welcome to come to any
Awesome.
one you want. We'll be in
Fabulous.
Chicago in April, which is a much smaller festival. But then we have our spring edition of Market in Portland in May, which I think would be interesting for you to come to because
Totally.
it has a little bit of a different flavor than the fall market. So
Yeah, I'm really curious what it looks like in different settings. So yeah, one of the things before we get to that are the Peace Corps. So I want to make sure we get to the Peace Corps. So tell me a
yeah.
little bit about so I met one of your Peace Corps that was also a guard for and so she was telling me a little bit about it, but tell us about what the Peace Corps is and what they do.
Well, the Peace Corps, and that's PIECE.
I love it.
They're kind of basically our elite group of helpers.
Mhm.
We have a lot of people who come work the show for us, either on a volunteer basis or a paid basis, depending on their situation. So, as you've seen, some of them will check tickets, guard doors, guard quilts, but the Peace Corps are really like I want to say the elite squadron. So these are the ladies that come in that really know about our show, about the quilts, how to pack them, how to take care of them, how to organize them. And we have them working at the show, but we also have them working here in the office helping us, year round. Remember, we have, of all the thousands of quilts that we have on display, they all come back here to the office. So
They
I
have to
think
go back home.
they just finished, I think on Friday, sending the last of the quilts off. Now, we keep some of the exhibits for our next shows, but the majority of them get sent back to the owners or to the organizing company that sponsored it. So that's a whole,
That's a lot.
process. And of course, there's the paperwork. There's the inspection we do when a quilt comes in. We always take a picture of it immediately so we know exactly the condition it came to us. And then we take another picture when we send it out. And there's checklists for, every quilt is looked at and inspected and packed before it goes back. So these Peace Corps ladies are not, they're not technically, full-time employees, but we could not do what we do without their help and their expertise. And you can't just, join the Peace Corps. You have to be invited to join. And even before you're invited, you have to go through hours and hours of training here at the office. So it's really,
It's really
they are the best of the best in terms of quilt helpers.
That's very cool. Well, the one I was talking to was very proud to be part of the Peace Corps.
Oh yeah, it's
it's a
I mean
thing.
when I mean you could work for years and years just as a regular person, but when you get, like the magic call or the magic email to be invited to join the Peace Corps, it's almost like you've made it into a great college or something.
Right, right. It's pretty funny. Well, before we wrap up, I would love, as we go, to continue to sort of, when we learn stuff, sort of come back and chat with you and see what your thoughts are about what we're learning. But are there any questions you think we should be asking people as we start to interview people? What would you be curious about? Um, is there anything in particular,
I
or?
guess tell me or explain to me a little more what the overall thesis or whatever you're
So,
looking at this point, even though that may
right.
change as your research develops.
So we're trying to understand sort of the whole of sort of what we saw. It's basically what we saw when we came to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to understand the industry, but also the average quilter, and how they interact, and mostly in terms of the intellectual property. So we're trying to understand the stories.
Right.
But what I'm really interested in is how much is intellectual property playing a role and how much is custom or what's called negative space, where there isn't anything happening, but people start to believe certain things. We're trying to really understand that role. And so there's a bigger project we call the role of law in creativity. And we've done this for video games and we're going to do it for cosplay. But quilting, we're doing because it's a bigger industry actually than these other ones. I mean, video games is big, gargantuan, but it's easy to get to the players, right? There's
Right.
quilting is just insanely huge and crazy, and there's lots of bits to it. And then all the history stuff and the museums and all that. So
I
we're really
think
trying to understand that.
the interesting you're going to find is that there's a lot of, in terms of the intellectual property, is a lot of lines that are blurred because, on one hand, nobody owns, say,